Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, my name is Nazmi Fathonah and I'm from PBI2B. Right now, I will make a presentation video about short story to fulfill my midterm test of technology enhanced language learning course. Okay, now let's get started. Here is the table of content for today's presentation that I will explain later. The first one is definition of short story. The second one is history of short story. The third one is 10 types of short stories. The fourth one is structural features of short story. The fifth one is element of short story. The sixth one is short story as a literary form. And the last one is learning media. Okay, now I will explain the definition of short story. Here I have 4 keywords in total. The first one is tells about a single event or experience. The second one is fictional or not true. The third one is usually only focusing on a single incident and a view character at most. And the last one is 500 to 15,000 words in length. So a short story is a piece of prose fiction that tells about a single event or experiences, also only have a few character at most, and typically can be read in one sitting with 500 to 15,000 words in length, or shorter than a novel. So short stories are shorter in its breadth and heartbeat, more like a story, and take a lesser and shorter degree of length to its narration than a novel does. For many writers, short stories are a less daunting way to dive into creative writing than attempting to write a novel. Okay, the next one is history of short story. There are 4 steps in total. The first one is 1790 to 1850. The second one is 1850 to 1900. The third one is 900 to 1945, and the last one is 1945 to modern day. So in 1790 to 1850. Early example of short stories in here were published separately between 1790 and 1810, but the first true collection of short stories appeared between 1810 and 1830 in several countries. The first short story in the UK or United Kingdom were Gothic tales called The Poisoner of Martyrs in 1791, and Germany soon followed the United Kingdom's example by producing short stories. The first collection of short stories was by Heinrich von Kleist in 1810 and 1811. The second step is in 1850 to 1900. In the latter half of the 19th century, the growth of print magazines and journals created a strong demand for short fiction between 300 and 15,000 words. And in 1890s, Britain, literary periodicals such as the Yellow Book, Black and White, and the Strand magazine popularized the short story. The spread of the short story movement continued into South America, specifically in Brazil. The third one is 1900 to 1945. So several authors during this time wrote short stories that centered on the device of satire and humor. Other common genres of short stories during the early to mid 1900 is in England, were detective stories and thrillers, and many of these short stories are classified in the genres of thrillers, suspense, or even horror. The European short story movement during this time was not unique to England. The stories written in a more accessible style than the later novels. And the last one is in 1945 to modern day. This is following World War II. The artistic range and The amount of writers of a short story grew significantly, and many other American short story writers greatly influenced the evolving form of the short story. Okay, next. Next is 10 types of short story. There are anecdote, rebel, fable, fighood, flash fiction, frame story, mini saga, story sequence, sketch story, and fignet. The first one is anecdote. Anecdote is a type of storytelling about a real person or an incident, and a short account of something is interesting as well as amusing, and often are used to illustrate it or support a point in an essay, article, or even a chapter. And they are very short in length but have no specific limits. The second one is drabble. The purpose of this type of storytelling is briefness. Exceptionally short, they compress like 100 words. And in here, an author's writing skill is out of test, as he has to express himself meaningfully in a very confined space. And there are many drabble examples, like The Lovely Matey, available over at Sugar and Blood, Light as Feather, and many more. The third one is Fable. It features anthropomorphic creatures, usually animals, mythical creatures, plants, inanimate objects, or forces of natures. Um, this kind of short story is telling story with a moral and most popular among children's stories. Often the moral is revealed at the end of story, and the most well-known example of fable is in Aesop's fables. The second one is Faghood. Faghood is short story with humor form as the most essential part of its storytelling and short length enough to leave the piece with the pun. Faghood is a story pun or a poetic story joke type of short story. And one example of this kind of short story would be The Bug of the Draw. The next one is flash fiction. The fifth one is flash fiction. This is an extremely short piece of literature. It has no widely accepted length, but has a debated cap of between 300 and 1,000 words. And one quintessential example would be One Last Night at the Carnival Before the Stars Go Out. The sixth one is frame story, also known as a frame tale or a nested narrative. It is a technique of placing a story within a story for the purpose of introducing or setting the stage for a main narrative or a series of short stories. For example, is flashback within a larger piece or a quest within a larger game environment. The seventh types of short story is mini saga. So if you can manage to tell a story in exactly 50 words, you can call it a mini saga. It is about saying a lot, but with a little words. The next one is story sequence. So when a group of short stories work together to form a longer piece, it is called a story sequence. However, each story functions as a complete short story on its own, so it is also called a short story cycle or a composite novel. And the next one is sketch story. So if you come across a description of character or location, it can be referred to sketch story. The story is a shorter than average piece of containing little or no plot, and the character sketches are common, a good way to build a character that will eventually be part of a longer piece. The last one is vignette. So a vignette is a short piece that focuses on a single scene, character, idea, setting, or object, and there is a little emphasis on adhering to conventional theatrical or literary structure or story development, and it can be a standalone piece or part of a larger work. Okay, the next one is structural features of short story. There are 6 in total. The first one is exposition, the second one is rising action, sorry. The third one is climax. The fourth one is falling action, and the fifth one is resolution. So first, exposition. This is the part of the story where the character and settings are introduced to the reader, and there are generally four types of character. The protagonist, who is the main character, and whose journey will follow in the story. And the second one is the antagonist, whose goals are often the opposite of the protagonist. And the last one is the dynamic character, who changes as a result of the event in the story. And the last one is the static character who does not change at all. The example of the dynamic character is at the first, she or he is a protagonist, but then she or he is changes into antagonist character. It's called the dynamic character. Okay, the second one is rising action. So it is a related series of incidents in a literary plot that build toward the point of greatest interest, faces challenges and crises. It is the catalyst which sets the story in motion, forcing the protagonist out of his comfort zone. Okay, the third one is climax. Climax is the point at which the highest level of interest and emotional response is achieved. This is the most important or exciting point in a story or situation, especially when this climax is happening near the end. Next is falling action. Falling action refers to the events that follow the climax. It happens near the end of the story, after the climax, and then the resolution of the major conflict. The last one is resolution. So, resolution is when the conflict has been resolved. The resolution is the end of the story and it occurs after the falling action or the climax. It is when you learn what happens to the characters after the conflict is resolved. Okay, next one is elements of short story. There are 8 of it. The first one is setting, the second one is characterization, the third one is plot, the fourth one is conflict, the fifth one is climax, the sixth one is resolution, the seventh one is theme, and the last one is point of view. Settings tells the reader where and when the story takes place. It is the character environment, including the season, weather, time, year, exact location, geographical features, and everything else that is possibly in the character surroundings. The second one is characterization. Characterization is the creation of imaginary people who appear to be real to the reader, and the writer gives the information about the characters in the story. And often others characters are characterized by indirect and direct characterization. The third one is plot. Plot is a series of events through which the writer reveals what is happening, to whom, and why. The fourth one is conflict. So conflict is a problem in the story that needs to be resolved. For example, types of conflict: man versus man versus himself, man versus nature, man versus society, or vice versa. The fifth one is climax. Climax is when the action comes to its highest point of conflict, and here is a turning point in the action. A shift in the story occurs. The sixth one is resolution. So the story's action after the climax until the end of the story, where all the loose ends are tied up. This foliation leads to the conclusion of the story. The seventh one is theme. Theme is the story's main ideas, the message the writer intends to communicate by telling the story itself. And the last one is point of view. So point of view or path is the position of the narrator of the story and what the writer sees from the vantage point. For example, first person, one involved directly in the action of the story and telling the story. The second one is third person, one looking onto the action but not directly involved in the story. And the last one is omniscient or all-knowing narrator. The next one is short story as a literary form. it must be noted that a short story has to make an impression upon the mind of the reader within a short period of time. So a short story should be a simple thing, aims at producing one single vivid effect, and has to seize the tension at the outset and never relaxing, gathers it together more and more until the climax is reached. So it must explode and finish before the interruption occurs or fatigue sets in. In fact, someone once said that short story is something which can be read an hour and remember for a lifetime. The aim of all good literature, as you might know, is to delight the readers and expand their understanding of men and manners. The short story is not different in this aspect. As a matter of fact, the short story is very difficult to classify as it is one of the most elusive forms, and it is also very difficult to define it within a particular limit. Reading a short story can be more profound and moving experience than reading a novel because of the sheer intensity of a short story. Okay, the next one is learning media. There are 6 in total. The first one is Short Pony. It is a web and a community for short story writers and readers. Each story in this web has a maximum of 10,000 words, with most being around 5 to 15 minutes reads. And the editors are particular about only accepting finished work and not chapter by chapter stories. So, as a reader, we aren't going to be left on a cliffhanger. And the Story Pony categorizes the short story in genres like crime, drama, humor, fantasy, adventures, mystery, and so on. So it is going through the trending stories in all submissions. The second one is Bungo Search. It is a web, and in this web, the length of the story is up to you, with the option being 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, or even 3 hours. This reading time is based on the average person reading 300 words per minute. And the third one is the Short Story Project. It is a web and also an application. The Short Story Project finds little pieces of fiction worth reading from myriad sources like original publication, translated works from other languages, and a retelling of the classic. The mobile apps itself are especially great at collecting the pieces you want to read. The fourth one is 1001 Classic Short Stories and Tales. It is a podcast. And the selling point of this podcast is Hagedorn's voice. He doesn't have the deep voice you've come to expect from a movie trailers or audiobook narration, nor does he act out different characters or situation to add flavor. It's just a humble retelling in a clear and endearing voices, which put the story in the forefront. The fifth one is Short Story Award. This is a web, and this web is ongoing since 2010, offer a massive prize of 30,000 British pound to the best short story of the year. All stories are under 600 words, and surprisingly, many of them are available for free online. The last one is Shortly. This is an app and an excellent place to discover new short stories every day. Shortly takes the best stories from the forum and turns it into a pleasurable reading experience. And you can sort stories on Shortly by reading time, namely 1 minute, 3 minutes, or even 5 minutes. And it is a gorgeous reading interface too. Okay, maybe that's all for today's presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.